have a gavel, but that's okay. Sample gavel. Call this meeting to order. Welcome to the February 26th City of Cupertino Planning Commission meeting. And let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic stands one nation, under God, liberty and justice for all. So roll call. Commissioner Moore? Here. Commissioner Fung?
Present.
Commissioner Wong here. Commissioner Saxena?
Present.
Commissioner Takahashi? I believe he's not here. Okay. All right. First item is the approval of the minutes. Anyone have a nomination, motion to approve the minutes?
I propose the motion.
There's a comment card on the minutes. Okay. I don't see a blue card, but we got one coming, and I believe it's Lisa Warren.
Hello. So I believe it's page 2 under public hearing. Wait a minute. Under oral communications, actually. It's what's representative of what I said that I would like to have corrected. And coincidentally, there was the same mistake written in some public, I think it's generated by some residents, is also incorrect. But I can't fix that, so I'll fix it here. What it says in the minutes is Lisa Warren asked the commissioners not to scold each other, rather to work together. She thanked them for their efforts to heal the divide, I suppose it's divided, or the divide in the community. And I was not speaking to you as commissioners when I was referring to scolding and directing. What I did say was I wanted to speak to the last 3 speakers, I guess. And I went on to say, I feel like there was a short little session of scolding and directing of the 5 of you. And I was not comfortable with how that happened. So I wasn't scolding you or the commission. I was speaking of the scolding that some members of the public were doing in their oral communications. So there's a clear distinction. I want you guys to know if you took that differently at the time. I hope not, but the minutes are incorrect, and again, this public thing is also incorrect in the very same way, so I can clear it up here, but nowhere else.
Okay. I guess we should.
You gotta fix them.
We can look at the fixing the minutes and making sure that the right items are in there.
Okay.
We can move to do that.
So yeah, if it pleases the chair, you can make a motion to direct staff to review the video and update the minutes, and then the updated minutes can be brought back at your next meeting.
Is there a motion to do that?
I would offer a motion for the staff to review the video and update the minutes.
Okay.
Is that coming?
All right. All in favor? We'll start a vote. Yeah, we'll do it this way. All in favor? We are doing the voting at the moment, so please place your votes. Okay, everyone has voted, and here we go. Okay, so the motion carries. We'll make changes and corrections to the minutes. Do we
actually I had one other, now that I think about it. The spelling of Marie Ann Shovelin is not correct in this as well.
What is the correct spelling?
The L and the V are reversed. May have been. That's something, again,
We can direct staff to
pick
do
that up from the comment, the speaker card. Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't need a
haven't seen
motion to
it.
correct. Yep, we can do that. Okay. Any other comments on the minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve the minutes with the corrections and the as noted.
Well, actually, the motion is actually to resubmit them to to Beth to regenerate the text of the minutes, and we'll approve that at a future meeting.
Good point there. So is there a motion to correct the two items in the minutes, one the spelling error and then one the comments from Lisa Warren, to staff for correction?
Yes, I want to put the motion to for Beth to review the video and also correct the spelling.
Okay. Is there a second?
I wonder, perhaps you want to direct us. I think that it may be sufficient just to direct us back to staff for.
Or we can just direct it back to staff.
I wouldn't necessarily place any staff members. I would just direct staff. That's sufficient enough.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, we'll just direct staff.
Rather than any specific items.
Okay, thank you. So we'll direct staff on that. Okay. Postponements, I don't think we have any here. Do we have any oral communications? Any blue cards out there? Okay. Do we have any written communications? All right. All right. I don't see anything on consent calendar, nothing on public hearings, and nothing on old business. So let's move to new business. On the first one, on the survey on improving council, commissions, communications, and work program flow, city manager, interim city manager, Borden, you have a presentation for us?
Yeah, thank you. Tim Borden, interim city manager, and thank you for having me here tonight. I've spent February going out to all the commissions to talk about this topic, which I'll give a little bit of history. Back in November of last year, the City Council approved ethics policy and other documents as far as how commissions and council, code of conduct and such. That was approved back in November, but then in January it was rescinded. Really looking to be more thoughtful and spend more time with commissions, get more input into the process. And so a subcommittee was set up of the council, and that was Vice Mayor Chow and Councilmember Paul, to come back in the March timeframe with a draft ethics policy. And so with that, they, starting their work, they put together this survey that's in your packet tonight where they're asking all commissioners to individually fill that out. If you've been on a commission and have experience to answer the questions, fill that out and then get that back to them to inform them of as to how they draft that policy coming back again in March. There may be some questions in the survey for new commissioners that still may be applicable. So if you feel comfortable and that you have the ability to answer the questions, feel free to do so and get those back. You don't need to answer them all. If there's questions about experience with the commission where you're not feeling like you have that yet. We have also emailed the survey to past commissioners, ones that just recently left, knowing that they have experience and their thoughts would be valuable on the process as well. So we'd ask that those get back within a week. If we could get those back by Monday, March 4th, we'd like to do that, and then we'll compile them and present them, all of the information received to the subcommittee. You can get those back to Lauren Saputer, our executive assistant in the city manager's office. So that's Lauren, Lauren, S at Cupertino.org. One other thing that I'd like to cover, that there are some questions about the process of developing the commission work program and how that aligns to the city council work program. So I just want to talk about that a little bit. You have a flow chart in your documents that outlines how we see the process working right now. Now there's been some inconsistencies and not a lot of clarity from commission to commission how this has worked in the past, so we're going to provide how we think it's supposed to work. Now your comments could also say that you have comments on that process as well, but let me try and walk you through that. If you start at the top of the flow chart on July 1st, that's when the city's fiscal year begins. So that's when you'll have, your commission will have an adopted work program, the council has an adopted work program, and you start that work. Your agendas reflect the work program that you've adopted. And then over the next 5 months or so, up until December, if there's additional things that the commission should want to discuss, put on your agenda, you can do so as long as it doesn't take additional city staff time. So what the council's work program does when that is set in process is really dictate how the city staff's work is going and resources are going to be developed over the next year. That doesn't stop the commissions from coming up with other things that they may want to discuss, talk about, research on their own without any significant staff resources. So that can always occur anytime. So if anything comes up until December that does require staff resources, what we'd ask that you do is that you basically start a list, a parking lot where you're putting items aside. And in December timeframe, that's when you would bring them through your staff liaison. That would be presented to City Council for their consideration for the next year's work program. So, and then in the February timeframe is typically when the City Council's goal setting or priority setting session occurs. This year it was February 2nd. That's when they take a look at all the different work program ideas that have come from them, from commissions, from staff, and prioritize them. Staff listens to that discussion, comes back and puts those thoughts in with the other things that are ongoing in the staff's work program, and brings that to a study session, work program study session to the City Council. This year it's going to be on March 19th. And so that's when the council will have a open dialogues discussion. Council members are certainly welcome to attend and give input at that point as well. And then at the City Council's next meeting, April 2nd, is when hopefully they will be able to approve that work program for fiscal year 2019-20. At that point, once the council has that approved work program, the commissions will take items that fall into their specific areas, and sometimes there could be multiple commissions depending on the subject matter. Those would go into your work program, and that's the alignment that we're looking for. So your commission would pick up items off of the City Council's work program that are appropriate, in this case for the Planning Commission, and then you would fill that out with the other things that you want to do, like I said, that don't necessarily take many staff resources, and then that would be your adopted Planning Commission work program. That would ultimately come back to council for approval, likely as a consent item, because you are conforming to their and aligning to their work program. So that's kind of a long process, but I'm happy to answer any questions. That's how we see it. And again, at the end of your survey, if you want to provide any comments in addition to the questions that have been brought up, the subcommittee has asked for that as well.
No, sounds good. Thank you, Interim City Manager Borden. Any questions for?
In terms of the threshold where you would want the city would want it to be budgeted for next year rather than something they can squeeze in, what would you say is like the approximate man hours or man weeks which can be accommodated, or do you have some buffer to accommodate those when you plan?
There certainly is some buffer. I mean, I wouldn't say that, if something is going to just take several hours for staff to put together, maybe even a few days. I think if we get into the weeks, we don't have any exact thresholds, and it would be a discussion with your liaison with the city manager's office. But I mean, once we start talking weeks, then I think that's when we're talking about a new work program item.
Thank you.
Makes sense. Any other comments from everyone?
So I have a number of comments. I guess, of course, I'll submit my my survey, but I did want to take the opportunity, at least since you're here, to address some of the questions that came up in the survey. The survey is unusual. I think currently only Councilman Paul is probably the only one who had experience serving on a commission here. So, so some of the questions are a little bit, they're a little bit unusual. And I'll send that in, I'll submit that as a comment as well. There were a couple things. I think there was discussion when the work program, or when the ethics policy came up. There was discussion about adopting Rosenberg Rules of Order rather than Robert's Rules of Order. That is it's definitely a simplification and probably appropriate for most of the commissions. I think for the council and for the planning commission, that may actually, there are a number of things which are harder to do in Rosenberg or not well defined. So that may be an area where you want to stick with Robert's Rules of Order, just so there's some expectation from somebody who came as an applicant, for instance, about how the procedure would be handled. Question number 3 was about communication of the commissioners with the council, and I think that actually was probably at the core of what the reason that, you know, it's interesting that the evolution of the action was that the ethics policy, I think, part of that came from questions about how does the council interact with the commissions. So I'd actually say that the question that they posed there are actually 2 different questions there. One of them has been about how do the commissions communicate with the council? And that's an area where I think it has been for a long time. There's only minimal communication, and part of that is the limitations of, you know, the fact that in almost every case the council is looking at something that is going, or the commissions are looking at something that's going to the council. So I think that they've been treading delicately around that. The other side, though, I think between the commission communications and the staff has actually been very strong. And I would say that the, you know, my years, I mean, I have 8 years now on Parks and Recs and Planning Commission. And, you know, I would say the staff has been exemplary at being available, being open, and being responsive. So I think that part's actually working well, and I hope that that they may recognize that there's actually 2 different questions there. The discussion about the new work plan model, I think, again, for Parks and Rec, because Parks and Recs are and Planning are kind of the bigger commissions of the group, we followed a pretty formal model, which is very close to the model of what the council does. And so I think that what's being proposed here is a minimal change. You know, the cycle of review. It's quite different for the other commissions. So I think that that may lead to some limitation of the scope of what's being discussed, because the model of how they decide where they're going is a little bit different in, you know, whether, you know, I think public safety is a good example where there is a lot of input from the commissioners there about the path and where they're going. So I think that I actually would say that you know, the issue around managing the workload on the staff is important, and so I actually have no problem with the way we're doing it. I'm, you know, deferential to the time constraints of staff. You know, in times when I was the Parks and Recs chair, I did twist the arm of our staff liaison pretty hard to make sure that we got things, you know, to the level. So, you know, Ben's smiling now. Let's see. There was question number 5 was about the mechanism for setting agendas. I think that in the past, this was normally the chair would be consulted on the issues coming up. And again, I found that it's the staff liaison has been very responsive to that. The only area, and again, this comes down completely down to workload. If you're publishing a agenda on Thursday before a Tuesday meeting, and you're having that discussion on Monday, then one of the problems may be that if you raise something as this is something, would it be nice, can we talk about this now? There's usually not enough time for the staff to respond. So those are things where in the past Parks and Rec directors have said, well, we may have to kick that forward a month, but we've always picked it up then. So I think that's something workable as well. There's a question there about commissioners being representative of the residents. Again, I think that one's a little little vague about whether, you know, is the composition of the commission intended to be representative of the community, or, you know, or do we take, you know, do people see that they are here as a representative for the community? And that's something where I think they just need to clarify the question a bit. That does touch, I think that one of the key things, with the exception of the Planning Commission, all the commissions here are advisory. So there isn't really an issue about commissions going out and making a policy in opposition to what the council was intending to do, because they must approve it, or, you know, or take any action for that to stick. With the only exception here being the Planning Commission, we're on the limited scope of smaller approvals that we do. I think that, so in that respect, if there is a concern that you'll have a kind of rogue commission going out and doing something, I think that that's probably not a concern. There is, I think, some frustration. I'll express this as a you know, as a veteran commissioner. There is some frustration. I think we will work through issues in the commission, send a recommendation up, and then have, you know, there may be parts of that which are ignored. And that's frustrating, although, of course, that's completely within the prerogative of the council to do. There was a question about whether there should be a code of ethics. You know, I think that the reality is that for the commission operations, because of the way we're defined in the municipal code and, you know, in state law, the actions that we take in state law, that's probably, we're probably sufficiently regulated that that's not an issue. But I think that, you know, we do have the issue, and I think that the place where this has popped up again is if a commission goes off the charter. And I think that this is an area where, you know, under normal circumstances, this would be a you know, something that's addressed by the liaison, right? And, you know, so I think there was a notable case in the last year. I think a number of the councilmen expressed surprise or concern about some of the actions taken by the Library Commission, which were not, unlike, this was not something that was sent down from the council as an action, and then there were actions happening in the public where I don't think the council was aware of what was happening. I believe that that's a liaison issue, and should be addressable there, just to make sure things track correctly. And then I think the last thing I wanted to comment here, there were two, the last two I was going to comment on were the issue around action minutes versus summary minutes. We actually, we adopted the action minute plan, and we actually kind of ran into a little bit of the problem with that in this set of minutes. With all due respect, it is difficult when you can have a complex discussion. It may be difficult to capture that concisely and neutrally. It needs to come back to the commission for approval. And so in that respect, particularly because from my experience on Parks and Rec and in planning, where we have video record, action is probably preferable. And the discussion about having audio recording, if that's something that's workable and something that the city can manage to do, I think that probably will be good with the other commissions as well. And then finally, there was a thing about submitting a update to the council every other month on what's going on. I think that for the same reasons that I would raise here around the minutes, the approval of minutes, I think it's very difficult to do that. Most of the commissions are meeting only on a monthly basis. A number of the housing only meet quarterly. So I think that there are actually a number of issues here around somebody would have to write something which isn't the minutes for it to be, there to be some reason to do something other than look at the minutes. Somebody has to write something, and I think it would have to really come back to the group to make sure that accurately reflects what we did. So I think that's probably not a workable suggestion. So that's a lot of comments. I'll submit the survey back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fung. Anyone else with any other comments? All right. Any other questions for, oh, good. Commissioner Moore?
Microphone, there we go. It's going now. Okay, I appreciate all of Commissioner Fung's experience and comments. I would like to see these audio recordings be happening on certain commissions. I've been looking up some online and I've been unable to find meeting minutes for a couple of commissions, and so I'd like to have that resolved. My understanding of this work plan is that because it's new, this new process, that we need to be flexible with the information that's going to be coming down to us from City Council, and I'm good with that. And it looks like a transition period for us. Now, with the Code of Ethics, I did not see anything about decorum, and there was something from the city of Manhattan Beach regarding meeting decorum, and it was interesting because it was allowed for free speech but kept the flow of the meeting going so it wouldn't cause disruption, and they wrote it very carefully so that it would allow people to speak their minds and still get the business done. So I'm a little confused about this, about the survey. With us having it due on the 4th, are we going to be able to discuss it afterwards when we turn it in, or is it, like, what's going to happen to it after that?
The intention is that staff will compile all of the survey information. Not exactly how we'll tabulate it, but we'll give all the responses to the subcommittee, Councilmember Paul and Vice Mayor Chow, for their consideration on how they develop the draft coming forward to council. Council will then consider that draft, and then it's my understanding at that point, with their comments, it would come back out to the commissions for review of that document.
Just to clarify, there was, in an early version of the plan, there was actually a study session that the commissioners were intended to go to, I believe. Is that not the case now?
A study session
on the input to the survey.
Yeah. So it would be this meeting. They were going to shoot for, I think, March 19th. I don't know if they'll still be able to do that or not, but probably March 19th or possibly the following meeting is when they would have that meeting to discuss the draft that is prepared. But there would also be a study session format, is my understanding.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. I'd like to propose that since we've got Interim City Manager Borden here, that we move number 4 up in terms of the agenda, in terms of work programs, since it's kind of a related topic and might be able to get a chance to kind of hear what we're saying on our end. We received the Planning Commission staff report on that. Ben, Interim Director Ben, would you like to add any comments to that?
I think the
Point of order there, I think we have to vote on that.
Sorry?
I think we have to vote on resorting the agenda.
Yes, I think you have
Oh, we
to
do?
vote for
Okay,
it.
we still do? All right.
Yeah.
All right. Is there a motion to, I'll make a motion here to resort the agenda to move item number 4 ahead of item number 3 at the moment. Item number 4 being the Planning Commission work program, and item number 3 being the draft citywide parks and recreation plan, master plan. So is there a second?
I second it.
Okay. We'll go and vote real quick and use the electronic voting.
Actually, we should probably discuss it for a second.
Oh, yeah, we should discuss too. Yes, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with it either way, but you know, just well,
I'm going to clear the vote here. So
that's all right. We can just go ahead and proceed.
Okay. Thank you. All right, here we go. All right, let's move. The ayes have it, and we're going to move item number 4 ahead of item number 3. Let's start with the work program.
Sure. In front of you have our 4-page report that basically outlines all the notable projects that we have accomplished and work program items that are continuous, as well as ones that have been accomplished. And this is the opportunity that for the Planning Commission to discuss any additional items that you wish to be placed for our work program for the City Council consideration and adoption. Obviously, we're here if you have any questions, but my hope is that it'll be a discussion process for the commissioners to kind of talk about what your wish lists are.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I make a proposal here that as we're discussing this, if people have certain items that you think we should add to the work program, let's do that now and collect a master list of that.
So I think you have some comment cards on this
And
item.
let's go to the comment cards as well. So that's kind of the thought process. We have Peggy Griffin. Please come up to the podium.
Council members, staff, there will be several general plan amendments coming up in the next year. And with that in mind, I would like to request that you as a activity or an item, work item, that you tighten up the general plan to specify objective standards and to clarify any ambiguities that are there. An example is parkland. Also, when a developer can pay in lieu of parkland. Those are 2 examples that come to mind right away, but I think that the city and its residents will benefit if you can tighten up and really say what you mean. And you're going to be updating the general plan anyway, so it might be a good time to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next person here is Jennifer Griffin.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Yes, we have lots of Griffins in Cupertino. Anyway, on this item number 4, I looked through the list of items that were actually on the Planning Commission work program, and I wanted to bring up the parking one. That actually, I think it's good to study it, but it's actually been floating around on the list for like 3 years. It was actually proposed by a former planning commissioner right before he was done with a very nice planning commissioner. But yes, it will be interesting, but one of the issues with the parking study is that at the time it was proposed, there were drastically different issues going on in the state, regionally and locally, statewide, about parking. So we need to remember that. This is the parking at the time that this item was asked to go on to the Planning Commission agenda. We did not even have the issues being brought down by the SB 35, what's been changed from Sacramento. And I want everyone to remember that. This item was not put on here in the last 6 months because of Sacramento sitting down and trying to reduce the parking requirements against the better judgment of cities in the state. We need to remember that. It's a pro and a con. I am personally against any attempt to reduce parking requirements in each city. San Jose tonight is voting on a massive housing project downtown by Diridon where there's 800 dorm types, and I doubt they have any parking they don't think those people have cars. I mean, I don't know, I'm not criticizing it. And then they're voting on the 600 housing unit down, I think it's Meridian Plaza tonight. I don't know what they're doing, but I doubt they have enough parking there. Also, I want to make sure that we get more parkland for Cupertino. Let's purchase Lawrence Mitty. Cupertino needs to own its parkland. And if you have park deficit areas, let's make a plan to make sure that we identify areas in the city that we can purchase parkland for them. Heart of the city, we do not want to see any attempt to break that. We've fought for it hard, and I don't, especially with the issues coming in from urban villages, we don't want to see that broken. Airbnb
Jennifer?
needs to be tightened up, and the ADUs have gotten out of control. Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you. We have Stephen Lester, and then we have Dashiell Leeds as well. So please come to the podium.
Hi, sorry, I meant to sign up for the master plan.
Oh, okay. We will switch that out.
Sorry.
All right, let's go to Daniel Leeds.
Hello, my name is Dashiell Leeds, and I am a volunteer environmental advocate for the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. I'm here to speak today about light pollution and a proposed work item that could potentially be done as regards to that. So human beings have melanopsin-containing ganglion cells in our eyes that are hardwired to perceive light, and it goes straight to the biological clock in our brain. So if we see light at night, that tells our biological clock that it's day, which can offset our circadian rhythm. This has been shown to lead to things like cancer and other serious health issues if exposed over a long period of time. Artificial light ignite also has a detrimental impact on migratory birds. Scientists call this phenomenon attraction or capture, as birds actually get trapped in beams of artificial light and can even have their entire migratory flight paths delayed or altered. So I think a sustainable future really requires us to take a look at light pollution. Fortunately, there is international consensus both on the science of light pollution and on the legislative side of it as well. So cities such as Malibu and Ojai, California, and even in France, they've adopted almost uniform light pollution standards. So I think this would be a really straightforward and easy thing for us to accomplish, would be to take a look at what other cities and countries around the world have done to mitigate light pollution, and just pass a straightforward light pollution ordinance that also includes provisions with specifically with regards to bird safe design as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa Warren.
So I wasn't really going to speak to this, but I would like to echo Peggy's comments about tightening up the general plan being added somewhere. We talk about it, we need to do it. We tried to get past council to do it, and it didn't happen. There's some fuzzy things that have created unnecessary problems in the past few years that need to be unfuzzied. I would add that I think the work program should include discussions and action on the CASA Compact, and maybe it's already in there somewhere. I also was very intrigued and supportive of sharing the costs of lobbyists between nearby cities, which I think Mayor Scharf has spoken in public and maybe driving something, but I'd like to definitely see that happen. And I think housing diversity needs to be discussed. I think it's important. We're going to have housing, more housing, lots more potentially. We need diversity in that housing, and we also need to, side note, we also need to make sure that we don't over job it. We need it to be useful housing. I guess that's it for now.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, no, I take that back.
All
I'd
right.
like to thank Dashiell for bringing up the whole light pollution issue, and I've tried to talk about it over the years in a much simpler way. He's got a lot more information, and I think he needs to be listened to.
Thank you, Lisa. Any other oral communications? Any other comments? Yes. Okay, Eric, you can fill out the card. And once again, as everyone knows, it's 3 minutes from public comments.
Thank you, Commissioners. I want to encourage you to put on your work plan an item to remove the 2 million square feet of office and 389 housing units that have been allocated to Valco in 2014. That was intended to be a provisional allocation that within 3 years would expire unless there was an approved specific plan that was supported by the community. There was no specific plan, May 31st, 2018. The new SB 35 law made these provisional allocations an entitlement, and the city lost control. So this is another thing that could be cleaned up in the general plan, as neighbors Peggy Griffin, Lisa Warren suggested. Let's see, so now we have an approved specific plan, but how popular is it? Well, one incumbent who supported the Tier 2 plan lost her seat. 2 new council members who campaigned on supporting referendum against the VTC were elected. And now the city's dealing with referendums to rescind the council actions that supported the Valco Town Center Tier 2. So the stars are aligning to give the community more say in Valco. And part of this requires removing the provisional allocations of office and housing. So please put it on the agenda and get the ball rolling. Thanks.
Eric, thanks. Can you fill out a blue card as well and give it to, okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to close those communications and then see what commissioners actually have on their work plan suggestions. We can go down the line, see if people have specific sets. Anybody ready with theirs? I've got a long list, so if you guys have the same thing, I'll just skip mine.
May I go first?
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Saxena.
Okay. The first thing which I want to talk about is a comparative study which compares our standards for mixed-use developments against other cities nearby or comparable cities in the state. Specifically, I want to compare the parkland requirement, the green space requirement, and the parking requirements for mixed-use developments.
Okay, we've got that.
I have more, but maybe we can go around. So
okay,
well, one by one?
Yeah, we can keep going. If you got more, let's go ahead.
Okay. So. The second thing which I wanted to talk about is having more internship programs in the city, where we invite bachelor's or master's students working in transportation, public policy, education, who can work on specific projects where we want to explore new things or again do benchmarking other things, so that we can utilize the brain power of other people and also get greater involvement in the way our city runs.
Okay, I'll defer. Commissioner Fung.
Let's see. Well, let's see. I think there were a couple different areas that I was interested in looking at. One of them, which I've discussed with staff before, has been to start a study about zero net energy incentives. So zero net energy is a plan where we look at going to systems that don't generate greenhouse gas, and generally this would require electrification, and where you try to do things which improve home efficiency, home and business efficiency, such that the energy used may become equivalent to what you generate with on-site photovoltaic systems. So the biggest reach is to look at zero net energy. This is something actually I've had discussions with members of the Sustainability Commission as well. So I think that would be an area to look at. I think that's actually kind of in maybe 4 pieces. One is to look at kind of where the state of the art with zero net energy policy in the cities. Another one is to look a step back from that, which is to look at things that encourage electrification. So that would be not using natural gas in the homes. In particular, I was talking with staff about that with regard to ADUs, where solar, on-site solar would not be able to generate sufficient power. you want to look at these same things on a commercial basis. Palo Alto has a pretty significant program around zero net energy planning. And so one of the things they identify is that in Palo Alto, only 30%, of course their job mix is different there, only 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from residential uses. So residential uses in particular, doing things like remodeling or reconstruction on existing homes, will only be a minimal impact, but those are actually ones that have high potential impact for the community. And then actually I think something that maybe even a little bit more doable is to look at trying to create some informational systems rather than creating a requirement for changes in the way that we use energy in our homes. That I think that would be desirable for the city to look at creating an informational program so that when somebody comes to the counter to look for a permit so that they can add a EV charger in their home, so they're going to increase their electrical capacity, that would be an opportunity to look for them to get information at that time about things like a heat pump water heater, which would, it requires an electrical service change, but it's not something that most people would think about. Most people don't think about a water heater unless their water heater isn't working, and then they want to buy the one that is the cheapest possible one out there. So, of course, that's not going to change. But having a system when people look to do things like making a change in electrical service, for them to then be handed information about energy conserving, induction stove, heat pump HVAC, and heat pump water heaters, that actually would be something where the people who receive that information are highly likely to have an interest in doing that. So I think that this is one of these things where I think that maybe one of the best ways to proceed on that would maybe, my suggestion to send up to the council is to consider putting together an ad hoc committee, I think with the Planning Commission and the sustainability for sure. This one will require a little bit of staff time to understand, we survey what other communities are doing and survey opportunities here. But I think that there's a different set of things. One level is to look at changing the building code. I think that's a very long-term thing, for sure. The intermediate thing is to consider incentives. If you were to decide to replace your water heater with a heat pump water heater, would we provide an incentive of some sort? And I think that's something that could happen in the very short term. And of course, the informational one, once you determine that information, I think that would be good. You also want to hand information to people on, I think it would be great for us to get information for the city to develop a policy. This is closely related on things like Greenpoint and lead policy. So we actually, we're CalGreen compliant, which means that we already have a pretty good chunk of the state-regulated requirements for improving efficiency. There are actually a number of these new ones as well. And again, rather than trying to impose a requirement on construction, I think that there's actually high value when somebody comes to get their house re-roofed. One of the Greenpoint things is that you put the insulation under the roof deck, and you insulate and you reduce the temperature of the attic. If you just told so I redid our roof 3 years ago. If somebody had told me that, I would have done it. So I think that this is an opportunity, again, an informational opportunity, could have a lot of impact. I think it's also useful to have an informational session, as a separate item, informational session to look at things related to conservation. We have in 2020, we're going to start having a solar requirement on new residential construction. Probably ought to talk about that, or at least have a community discussion about that. So it would be great to understand what's happening. The Sustainability Commission, again, so I've worked pretty closely with them on this to date. They had, in 2018, something called Buy Clean was passed. Tim, you probably know about it, but I doubt anybody else, where there are reporting of the greenhouse impact, of the carbon impact of building materials. And this wouldn't affect something like a home, but it would be interesting, I think, to perhaps use the Planning Commission as an opportunity to have a public informational session on that. We've got two other two other items, I guess. One of them would be, one of the things I think that we probably is, one of the things that came up very high on the list of the council's areas of interest was to look at general plan and specific plans. I would actually say the heart of the city specific plan is probably due for a review. There are a number of things that are in the way it's constructed today which are not, which don't normally, they don't mesh very well with kind of modern planning theory. In particular, Heart of the City addresses the transit corridor in town. So to a much greater extent than any other area in town, that will be affected by some of the legislation that's being, potential legislation that's proposed that would change the regulations around transit areas. So I think that actually is an area where there probably should be some rework. And then I did get a request from the Audubon Action Committee. David, I think you must have been part of that group, which had a recommendation to take a look at what's called dark sky policy. And this is what he mentioned. So as a planning commissioner, my spin on that is I think it's really something worth looking at. As we look at doing things like changing the lighting, changing our street lighting, we may have, in some respects, we were so quick to go to LED lighting that we may have missed an opportunity here. But as we look at this, I mean, I think there's a lot of activity we see in this commission around doing things, controlling lights on buildings such that they don't annoy your neighbors. There's actually a lot of opportunity as we're doing that to do things that are beneficial for the, for our night sky environment. And so I just hope we can integrate those things together. As with all these things, I think that there's high value in having education, high value in trying to set out, here are some optional things we can do today that start us on the right path, and then have, that from that maybe a statement about, in the longer term, when do we start to change regulations to cause those things to happen. I think that's my main set. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner Fung. Commissioner Moore?
Thank you, Commissioner Fung, for bringing up the home energy. I would like to actually add on to your suggestion because I have people in my own neighborhood who are heating their homes with wood in the fireplace, and perhaps if there could be some, if you're looking at incentives, some way to help them make the jump, not just to natural gas, but onto solar would be, yeah, that would be really helpful. And I agree with the comments from Lisa about having a study session about CASA and the new legislation, and to have that include strategies that the city can implement in working with our neighboring cities perhaps, and forming some coalitions in the region to help become educated and then determine a course of action that we want to take. I'd also like a study session to address some misunderstandings regarding housing and calling certain projects housing developments when there's an excess of office in the project, and which ends up worsening the housing shortage. So if something be kind of math intensive, but something to help educate around that. So that we have some multipliers so that the residents can then look at a project and do the math themselves and be able to come to a meeting and say, this really isn't helping the situation, rather than just relying on a few of us that are, saying this over and over. I would like to, and I don't know if it would be us who would be studying this, but I'd like to look at the Economic Development Commission and Department and see what we can do to help with that, because we've had a decrease in our retail, really kind of both sides of the city, and are we going to continue with that? What do we want to do about it? And possibly have that Economic Development Commission be created by an ordinance. It looks like it might have been done by resolution, I'm not sure. And then if we could have a discussion on housing, and the comment was about having housing diversity. And so there was the Agri-Hood, which just got approved in Santa Clara, which has a huge garden space, which is going to be added into it. We have issues with not having developmentally disabled housing and enough moderate income. And we need to look over at what San Jose is doing with their co-housing, and because they're having a very large project put in, and see how that is going. If it's, it looks like it's popular in San Francisco. Is that something we might want? And we have really long application approval time limits, if there's something that we can do about that, so developers aren't sitting with 10 years on an approval and not moving on it. What strategies do we have at our disposal? And I don't know about the Valco hearings. That would have to, I guess, come up as a study session. That was something that Eric had brought up, and I guess we would have to review the hearing process to see if that is something that we would do or not. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. I've got about 15 items, and I think we have some overlap, so I'll quickly go through mine as well. First one on mine is CASA new legislation. Really understanding the impact of CASA, what the housing developments, the ratios, and the legal requirements. I think it's worth a study session. It's coming down quickly. Hopefully we'll learn some things at the Planning Commissioners Academy next week. Housing diversity, I would add to that moderate income, teacher homes, tiny homes to that list. So new housing models, co-housing, developmentally disabled, that's, I think, what's said before. Permit approval times, we need to do something about that, given the fact that we've got a number of BMRs and AIs and VLIs that are under there that that we can't get built, right? So in that new process, like, I mean, we should set time limits, right? If you can't build it in 3 years, you can't build it in 5 years, you haven't started construction, we're going to pull those permits and put it in an open lottery. You might get some very interesting results. People might bid for that permit like a medallion in a taxi. I'm sorry about that. Permit approval time limits, I think that's the big one. Fast track second story additions. I think if there's a way for folks to do that, that's fair, that helps the neighbors understand what's being built there. There's neighbor education around it, but any way to actually help people reduce the time it takes to actually build in their own home within the limits of what we have, that might be useful, so something we're studying. Fast track one-story remodels and additions as well. And then for me, high-density residential design guidelines. I think there's a lot of cities that have done that. There's a lot of experience on the staff that have done that before. Maybe there's a way to look at how we do high-density residential guidelines that might help with that process. I agree with the Audubon team over there. The bird-safe design guidelines for dark sky policies, that's on my list as well. And then municipal code cleanup. You know, I've been talking to a number of folks from city council, from other from other commissions, and it's a mess. It doesn't match. I think that's something that might want to put up there. GPA cleanup is on my list as well. The one that confuses me, maybe I just don't know how everything works, is that, you know, even in the plan we have Valco Shopping Center has been changed to Valco Town Center, but I don't know if that's approved or not approved or what the status is on something like that. And then this might study session on restricting road diets. I have a lot of neighbors complaining about how the roads are shrinking and traffic is not flowing. I guess my only comment around that is maybe there's time limits on where you put a bike lane, and if it doesn't work there, maybe put it somewhere else. But at least have people, give residents the ability to come back and say, is that being used, not being used? Should we widen it maybe? So that's one that came back from a number of residents. And then this one might not fit within ours, but review of electric scooters, e-bikes, and motorized vehicles. Figure what the right policies are. If you've been in downtown San Jose, you've probably seen that the scooters are everywhere. If you were in San Francisco, you noticed that the scooters were even in the trees. That wasn't kind of fun. So this might come to us at some point. And then I've got a couple ones, parkland standards. I think someone brought that up earlier. I think that's important. New solar standards, I agree. I think there's some great things there on the EV side, and especially with the legislation that's coming. BMR standard housing designs might be a way to do that. And then mixed-use project standards. I think that's something we might start to look at, given how the mix of retail housing office might look at. And then the last one is neighborhood area input on objective standards. And what I mean by that is if you're living in Monte Vista, you're out there and you want an electric motorized gate, and that's kind of, some people have it, some people don't have it. It's kind of interesting. Or you could be in Rancho, where I am, where we have 2 cutouts for every house almost. Like every third house has a cutout for an RV. It's kind of an interesting feature, right? But just looking at those. So I think that might be something to create a study session on. So sorry for the long list, but hopefully that gets put on the list and we can figure out prioritization later. Commissioner Moore.
May I ask a member of the public to come back and answer a question?
Mr. Attorney, can we do that?
Yeah, the commissioners can ask questions from the speakers.
Okay. Jennifer, I was wondering if you would be able to come up. I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. I was wondering if you could explain what you meant by heart of the city and you don't want that broken. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yes. If people were not familiar, there's a lot of new people on the commission and staff members and residents. The heart of the city is a pretty tightly coded set of laws about what is the expectations of how Stevens Creek Boulevard is presented with a 35-foot setback. And there has been a great deal of effort by community members, previous council members, city council staff to build and maintain heart of the city as it is. I mention this because there has been a concentrated effort by different groups to change heart of the city by reducing the setback to perhaps 25 feet, 10 feet. This has been exhibited many times by issues that San Jose has built. I'm not going to beat on them, but their ideas of a setback on Stevens Creek Boulevard and San Carlos is very different than Cupertino's. Santa Clara's is different, and what is happening to El Camino Real. So I think it's very important that people understand that there has been a great deal of historic input from people in the city in the last 10 years, 15, 20 years, to build and maintain heart of the city, and I would expect that it be given the respect that it deserves. We don't treat it lightly. To me, being a resident of Cupertino, especially the eastern part, I have spent years working on heart of the city, and I believe that it's one of the hallmarks of Cupertino, and it's something that we should be very, very proud of. If that helps, if you have any more questions, let me know.
I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone with any more questions? Any more suggestions on to work plans?
Yes. I wanted to build upon what Commissioner Funk said, and this is a question also, that when we have ADU additions, can we make it a policy to have some compensating photovoltaic thing put on? Is that something which you could consider? And the second thing is that I'll say I have no relationship with ChargePoint or ex-Mayor Leventhal's company, but I think we should have some guidelines for how many, when we have new construction and new parking lots, we should have some guidelines on making sure we have enough electric charging points. Because as the use of electric vehicles increases, we would want to have that, and we want to support that via our planning guidelines.
Okay, thank you. Any other suggestions? And that's a really long list that we have at the moment.
There were 2 items on the, they seem very trite compared to some of the other things we talked about here. There were 2 items in the staff report that I just wanted to comment on. One of them was, it was about tabling for public outreach at the Creekside Park Farmers Market. I consider expanding that to hit the Oaks as well. Both sides, they're both pretty big these days. And there was also an item in there which was penalties for violation of conditions of approval. Now, I don't know whether this was intended to be, a couple of the commissioners here brought up the issue of somebody who's entitled and doesn't start building for a long time. That one seemed like a strange one to me. I mean, of course, the penalty for violating your conditions of approval is that you can't build your project.
Can't build.
So, you know, I mean, we can come back and talk about the philosophy of how to get people to build quicker. I mean, most of that is just don't approve a project that has a long,
That are phasing, you mean?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I have just kind of a general question, because we were also given the 2018-2019 city work program, and it's because these items aren't given to the different commissions. I'm kind of wondering, when looking at these, some of them aren't completed and still need to be worked on. And some, you know, do say that they're completed. And so I'm wondering two things, like, you know, who do these jobs belong to? And goodness, should we be commenting on some of these? Okay, thanks.
So the question is, by who? You mean which commission are they directed to? So that's a good point. So that may be something that we want to add to the table going forward, is to include a commission column in that. So I think that might be a good idea. So we'll look at doing that for the ongoing items and the new items.
Okay, so another issue, which I mentioned briefly a couple of days ago, is when I looked at the organizational chart for the city and compared it to the Cupertino Municipal Code, it wasn't matching up. And it also gave the power to the city manager to alter the departments. And that I thought was kind of interesting from, I don't know, kind of a legal standpoint, because it looked like that the manager could change the municipal code, because if they're allowed to change the departments, they're allowed to change the different parts of the municipal code which defined the departments. So maybe that falls, I don't know if that's a whole topic on its own, or if it just falls under Cupertino Municipal Code cleanup in general, but it would be helpful, like when I pull up the organizational code, that when I go to the municipal code, I see them matching, and what their roles are. And then I'd also like if there was some more assignment about who gets community development, and I know you said some of these overlap into different commissions, and so unfortunately you might end up with another column which is going to have, like, you could have 4 commissions which will all have input on something. Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are no other comments, what is the recommended action on our end that we have to make? Anything, I'd say, Interim Director Phil?
So the recommendation is that for the City Council to consider the Planning Commission fiscal year 2019 and 20 will program. And so we've taken notes, and we indicated all the items that you've offered support for. So that will be part of our memo going to City Council.
Okay, thank you. Is there any voting action that we have to do, anything, Attorney? Okay,
Yes.
very good.
Yeah, so you can
Make a-
motion to
For the recommendations.
to direct staff to forward the recommendations as you've discussed, unless you have further discussion or refinement to your recommendations.
Okay. All right, is there a motion to direct staff to take their recommendations along with our recommendations to City Council?
I'll move that that the staff take the recommendations from the Planning Commission to City Council. I would ask also, and we did this last year, that you bring back a copy to us as well. That is not, just as a follow-on, so that we can confirm what was forwarded to the council matches with what we intended.
Okay, I'll second that. we'll do some voting here.
Before you vote, though.
Yep, as their discussion?
Yeah, there were a couple discussion items that I wanted to touch on. One was regarding, there was a question that had come up during the oral communication regarding parkland dedication. I believe that's, we follow the Quimby Act there and the amended Quimby Act. So I'm not really sure that there's you know, where we have flexibility, just as a point. There was a mention in the comments as well about parking and about SB 35's reduction of parking. That's actually that's a state effect of streamlining, one of the incentives for streamlining. So that would not be something that we would have an ability to affect. There was mention about the co-housing project, the Star City co-housing project, which is under consideration. That actually does have a one car space per bedroom requirement there. So it's one car space per bedroom is low, but that has many small bedrooms. You know, the bedrooms are small such that it would only be a single person per room. And then I think with regard to Commissioner Moore's last comment about the structure, I think maybe I'm wrong about this, but I believe that, you know, the city manager controls the has kind of sole discretion over the organization of the city staff. What's in the municipal plan, what's in the municipal code is generally a description of the commissions, which would be a separate thing. You know, not under the commissioners or under the city manager's control. But I don't think that there's a conflict there.
I'll just point out that while the city organization is and the organization of that is under the purview of the city manager, there are certain departments and their duties that are codified. And so it would, although the organization could be changed and reorganized under the city manager, the council would ultimately need to approve that via a municipal code change.
Yeah, basically we haven't been keeping those in order. So, but we still have a motion on the table, and any other discussion around this?
Yes. So with regards to parkland, it falls under it's falling under the Subdivision Map Act, which is also in our municipal code. And there's parkland requirements on their own within our municipal code. And we have the parkland requirements in the general plan. So it's showing up in at least 3 areas. And those all do need to match, and we do need to clarify, does parkland mean a space on a roof, and are you giving the $7 million per acre benefit to a developer if they're building space on a roof? And I think
which may not have public access as well. So
yeah, we need to some discussion around that. And also with the municipal code with regards to the city manager, it's 2.48.020 departments and divisions, and the issue is that there's 5 departments mentioned, and the organizational chart looks like it's showing about 7. Thank you.
We still have a motion on the table. Any other discussions? All right, with that I'm going to start the vote. Okay, motion carries 4-0-1. So, all right, we're going to move to item number 3, which is the draft citywide parks and recreation system master plan. And I'm going to call up a number of individuals first, or we start with the staff presentation, and then we'll call up the number of individuals, and then we'll have a discussion.
So we will have staff presentation, and then commission will have the opportunity to ask questions of staff.
Yep.
And then we will open up, since staff is the applicant, you wouldn't need to open for applicant presentation, but you have to open to public
Yes,
comments.
we have public comments.
Right? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, good evening. Jeff Melkus, Recreation Community Services Director. Very pleased to be here tonight to help present the public draft of the master plan that we've been working on. Apologize for my short delay. I have a little bit of a tricky nature here to get up in the seat. We've been working in earnest on the system master plan since about 2015. And we had a change in consultants about halfway through, and so over the last couple of years we've been making very, very good progress. We expect and hope that we can be heading toward an adoption process at the very end of this spring. And in the meantime, we have our public draft, which we provided to you, within the staff report, and we're kind of looking for additional guidance and such. This is a plan that's very opportunistic by design. Our intention is to kind of set out a number of different options, get fairly specific where it's appropriate, and then through a system of strategic planning, as well as simply business plans and feasibility studies, start then to move forward on some of these projects. But we live in a city that affords us an incredible quality of life already. However, we know that land is also is tough to come by in order to build parks or provide open spaces. As a result, there are a lot of decisions that'll have to be made down the road in terms of, is it appropriate for us to buy up land in the place of housing, for instance. But one thing we do know for sure is that whichever direction we end up going with the plan down the road over the next 25 years or so, it calls for a need for creative opportunities and definitely creative partnerships with school districts, as well as the private groups and what have you. I mean, when we develop or design a park system through a master planning process such as this, it really means that we're carving out what the city will kind of look like and feel like, and it'll take all of us to do that. So without anything further from me, Gail Seeds is here, who has really spearheaded this project, and she's going to take you through a nice process, and it's all yours, Gail.
Thank you, Director Milkus. And good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. Thank you for setting aside some time for us tonight to walk you through our draft Parks and Recreation System Master Plan. I want to make sure the mic is working. There we go. I will go through a presentation with you, and there's an opportunity for questions, and we will invite public input as usual, and we're looking for your feedback on this plan as well. Just a few quick words about the purpose of the plan. This is a roughly 20-year plan. It aligns with the general plan planning horizon, and it is a plan that is intentionally flexible. It's a framework, and it gives us guidance for moving forward with our Parks and Recreation System into the future. The master plan does have a range of possibilities in it, and it is a framework and really a tool. It's not ordinance. And as I said before, it's deliberately flexible so that we can take advantage of opportunities that unfold in the future. This slide summarizes our planning process. We are at the kind of golden yellow bar next to the bottom. We are at the plan development and refinement process here with this draft master plan. The plan is organized as shown here. There's an executive summary, and there are 5 chapters as noted. And the appendices in this case have some very important elements. In particular, there is mapping in Appendix D that is important to be aware of, and there are tables in Appendix E that really have a great deal of important information that supports the narrative in chapters 1 through 5. A quick summary of our city park lands. This is batched and summarizes what's on table A1 and groups our park system into types. The community parks are Memorial Park and Stevens Creek Corridor. They're the large regional parks that serve the wider community. They are 20 or more acres. Our large neighborhood parks range from 4 to 13 acres. Small neighborhood parks are generally under 3 acres in size. Special use sites are sites such as the Mary Avenue Dog Park that serves dog owners, but you probably wouldn't go there, go out of your way to go there if you weren't going with a dog. Sites such as the Cupertino Sports Center, they're really serving a special segment of the community. And then we also include the school sport fields where we have a joint use agreement with the Cupertino Union School District. That is 9 of the elementary and middle schools. It is not 100% of the schools in the school district, and also trail corridors. A little snapshot of some of the quantities of recreation facilities we have, what kinds of types they are, how many they are. This is pulled out of that table A1 as well. The consultant team did an analysis and evaluation of our park and recreation system. They looked at our level of service, the acreage we have per resident, the distance one needs to travel as a resident to access parks in our community, and the availability of recreation facilities and their distribution. The opportunities analysis that went forward to the commission focused on these items, on expanding our system and really on looking at where we have parkland deficiencies, on connecting the system and fostering natural systems, which are maps D1 and D2 in Appendix D, and in diversifying recreation facilities, which is, there's some narrative in the body of the report, and there's a lot more detail in Appendix E on that item. Our team found that Cupertino was a unique community. We know that. And they flagged a couple of things that jumped out at them. Another thing not on this slide that is clear about our community is that we are a highly educated community. So not only do we value education, our residents are well educated themselves. And some of our priorities are on that bottom bullet. There are several groups that have been guiding this process throughout the development of this draft master plan. The project management team, a project advisory group, the Parks and Recreation Commission, and our city council. A little bit of information about some of the mechanisms we've used to invite public input. The two ones with highest participation were the 2 community-wide surveys we did. The first one and the second one, we had what's considered very good participation. And we have held workshops, meetings, intercept events, interviews, a number of other mechanisms to invite our community to tell us what they think and what they want. Just a summary of what we did for outreach on the first citywide survey. And something we tried that I think has been successful, and if you think it has been, that would be good to hear. We started installing lawn signs at the parks and at our recreation facilities, figuring that would be a good way to capture some of the people who are most interested in what we're doing with our parks and recreation system planning. And on the second survey, we added yet some more additional outreach efforts. In particular, we had a cover article in the Cupertino Scene, which is widely distributed, and a nice write-up. There was also additional mailings and email efforts and social media. And on the May 2018 workshop, we added spots on our radio station and on City Channel, and promoted that workshop very actively as well. The results are that we have found there are 12 themes that have emerged consistently from the participants of what is important to them and to this planning process. Those themes were used to help build a vision and a mission statement. This vision and mission statement went to the Parks and Recreation Commission and to the City Council in September of 2017. And those helped underpin how we built our goals, objectives, and actions. There are 7 goals in this master plan. Conservation emerged as a high priority community-wide across all ages, across all types of groups, about being good stewards of our natural resources. Connectivity is another very key priority. We've heard that clearly, consistently, that trails and opportunities to walk or bicycle to and from destinations, including our parks and recreation destinations, is very important. People are looking for us to strengthen that. Equitable access is another thing we've heard from our residents, that they are looking for equity in our park system and equitable distribution of parks and recreation resources. The 4th one on enhancement, our parks are mostly, a number of them are aging. They were designed several decades ago. They're traditional. They have very traditional facilities and amenities, and they haven't all been freshened up to kind of keep up with current trends and current interests. The activity goal is about how we program spaces, what activities we offer, the events we do. The quality goal, that covers a wide range of things, a lot of good actions in that goal. And the last one on sustainability, that one is not just about solar power and energy efficiency, it's also about operational sustainability and financial sustainability. We have 4 types of recommendations in the actions and in the recommendations in the appendices. Some of them are system-wide, some are about particular sites, some are for potential major investments, and then there's specific things about specific types of recreation elements. With that, there are slides, in case we need to go back to them, that summarize the objectives and actions that go with each of those goals. So I will just breeze through these. The language in these is a little bit collapsed for brevity. So there's one on each of our goals: connectivity, the equitable access goal, enhancement, activity, quality, and sustainability. Then we get to enhancements to our existing parks. And in table E1, there's a description of each park, and there's language about a vision and focus for each of our city parks. So I would encourage people to read those, and in particular that vision and focus kind of communicates where we could aim in the future. Since we didn't assign which park should get a basketball court or which park should get a bocce court, really that process would involve neighborhood input and additional outreach. But looking at the vision for each of these sites, we thought would help provide a framework, and there's some language about the kinds of things to consider. So each of our parks is addressed individually in table E1, as well as our existing trails. There are some short and long-term thoughts on those. And on the school sites where we have joint use agreements for use of the sports fields after hours. On new acquisitions, there are recommendations for new parks, and that one is really about if opportunities do arise to acquire and develop new neighborhood parks and to target the areas that are underserved, that are deficient in parkland. On the new trail recommendations, that one is to continue coordinating with Public Works and to develop the priority trails that are already identified in our bicycle transportation plan and our pedestrian transportation plan, and in some other regional planning documents, the countywide trails plan, and those things will support multi-use recreation, park access, and the connectivity that our community is looking for, non-vehicular options. On potential major new facilities, it is important to point out that all of these things are potential. Anything in this plan that's a capital project or would involve allocation of staffing and resources will need to be aired and approved. There are some major potential new facilities identified, and the short-term recommendation on all of them is to explore partnerships and joint use opportunities, and that in the short-term recommendations, if any of them is desired to be pursued by the community and our decision makers, our city council, to study those things via a market analysis and a business plan before going any further. Any of them, if there is interest, would need to be vetted. So there is information about potential ideas for a year-round aquatic facility. Currently, we operate a seasonal facility at Blackberry Farm. Information about a potential performing and fine arts facility, a gymnasium and multi-use recreation center. We do not have a full-size indoor gymnasium available to the city. They have them at the schools. And we have a little space in the basement of the sports center that is not a full-size court. Two more major potential items are expanding senior center services or recommendations. The population of seniors is growing in quantity, and it's growing percentage-wise regionally at a much quicker rate than younger age groups, and that's a regional demographic. So that's something to be mindful of in our planning. And this community's focus on teen and youth empowerment. We have identified a desire to really focus on teen services that serve our teens and youth, and to think about what kind of spaces and services will serve them. Our current teen center, we've heard, is not at the best location for our teens, so geographically it's not in a desirable spot. I won't speak about each of these, but there are recommendations for diversifying our parks and recreation system, adding nature play, adding more opportunities for water play. You don't have to have a swimming pool to have water play, universal and all-inclusive play, and activating our neighborhood parks, not just having all of our events at Memorial Park. The discussion about diverse features, there's a long laundry list of things in that that are very tempting, and we've heard interest from our residents and community members about a number of them, and what to do for our sports facilities, what things need, what do we need more of. For example, we don't have a single full-size basketball court that the city operates, with the exception of the multi-use court at the sports center. We have a few almost half-size courts at a couple of our parks. And lastly, but certainly not least, natural vegetation enhancements, dear to my own heart, that would align with our community's desire to see us exercise high natural stewardship and be mindful of supporting wildlife and supporting environmental education in how we manage and operate our parks. There's a lot of good recommendations in that section. This planning process has been going on a while. A couple of things we have gotten started on. There is a funded capital project to design a concept for Memorial Park and start to move forward into a first phase of improvements. That's an existing funded CIP for the working out the concept. The Cupertino Loop Trail, our Public Works Department is working on our trail projects. The Stevens Creek Corridor Master Plan can get rolling again once this plan is squared away. We have been expanding our teen opportunities. We added a number of things that are discussed in Chapter 5 already. We've been expanding their offerings. And on that neighborhood park activation, I'm sure that you've been able to see and hear about the pilot project we did this last summer, July, August, and September. I believe it was 34 events at 11 different parks and shared sites as a pilot project that was presented to our Parks and Recreation Commission and the Council in November and December, the results of that effort. And lastly, we will be coming forward with a strategic plan that will tell you how we'll implement what sorts of things in what order, kind of the first wave of implementation priorities. I won't walk you through that, but there are short-term recommendations on each of these things in Appendix E, and some of them are in the body of the report. And the same thing for the major projects. On the major projects, the short-term recommendation is basically to seek partnerships to address need and desire for, say, performing arts space or swimming by collaborating with potential partners, looking for joint use opportunities and that sort of thing. We did want to flag and make sure people knew that any of those potential major projects would be a big investment. They'd be a very important investment, and I think that we got the word out really well about that, about how we're talking a lot of money, so any of those things would be a serious choice to be very thoughtfully considered before proceeding. And to not forget operating costs, maintenance costs, and costs to program any new things that we add or anything that we expand. That's part of the equation as well. And on that note, it's Appendix G or H, Appendix F, excuse me, talks about different ways that these kinds of things could be funded, not just tapping the general fund, but other opportunities to deliver financial support. And the last appendix, Appendix G, has some prioritization tools. Now we get to input that we have gotten on this draft plan so far. This slide talks a bit about how we've publicized it. And one thing we've noticed is that our master plan email list has been growing over time. Every week and month there's a few more people on it, so that's good. We also ran a homepage banner on the city's website this time, and we were able to produce a narrated video. That was a new addition. That's been available on Facebook and on the city website. So that's been nice to continue to make our outreach efforts more robust. I won't spend much time on these. The input that we have received is included in your packet with one exception, a desk item. I'll get to that in a moment. The Bicycle Pedestrian Commission gave us their input on this draft master plan on January 16th, and understandably they were very enthusiastic about the Cupertino Loop Trail and wanted us to emphasize the importance of that in this draft master plan. They had a few additional comments, some specific comments. On January 22nd, we had a jointly hosted youth and teen forum that our teen commission worked with us on, and we had 54 comment cards submitted by our young attendees. I hope you had a chance to take a look at those because they have some great ideas for us. We've got a lot of sharp young people in this town, very thoughtful, and they had really good suggestions. They were as concerned about trails and connectivity and being good stewards of our natural resources as the overall community. We got some mixed input from them about teen services in the teen center, some feedback on potential major projects, and then some comments on particular activities, as well as these points on this slide. And they also want us to be smart financial stewards. We heard that from more than one. The public workshop that was held on January 23rd at the Senior Center kind of some of the key takeaways are in blue at the top of this slide, that acquiring parkland, particularly in deficient areas, is a priority for those attendees, and that equity in parkland distribution and walkability to parks is a priority, and trails and walkability in general. We keep hearing that from our participants. The Parks and Recreation Commission weighed in on this on January 24th. You have the meeting minutes in your packet, and that is attachment 5, and their input is described in the staff report. Some of their input, there was consensus across the board, and then there were some individual commissioner comments. Lastly, the City Council has weighed in. They weighed in on February 5th. I don't have a slide for that. That slide is missing, but they unanimously emphasized partnerships and seeking partnerships and strengthening partnerships across the board. And then there were several that flagged support for particular items, maintaining progress, community gardens, everything from pollinator pathways to outdoor exercise equipment, a number of comments, and you've got that in your packet. That concludes my presentation, and we are looking forward to questions, comments, and feedback. We'd be happy to respond to any questions you have.
Okay, but the process is now we open up to our questions and the public's questions and then move from there. So any questions from the commissioners? And thank you for your presentation.
No, thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I was especially impressed by the amount of outreach you made an attempt to do. I think that's very valuable. I wanted to also get a sense of how many people actually participated in the prioritization. I know we had some numbers in terms of number of people who were reached out and all the efforts did, but how many people actually came in and helped you prioritize at the end, especially towards the sessions held this year?
Well, these projects are they're batched by category, and there's some ideas for short-term actions and longer-term actions. But in terms of what we implement, those will come forward in the strategic plan and in the capital improvement program. And this is still intentionally visionary and flexible. So I think I'm not answering your question properly. If you're looking for, do you want to know how many people participated in which activity?
Yes, and specifically any activity that was taken to help prioritize. I think there was a slide about prioritization. And
the prioritization, there are prioritization tools in the appendix for looking at when we come forward in the upcoming capital improvement program that will, in our case, it'll go to the Parks and Recreation Commission first and then to the Council for parks projects, and tools for looking at what projects to do in what order. There are some matrices and scoring mechanisms to help sift there are always a lot of things we'd love to do, but there's limited money and limited resources. And those prioritization tools, they did go to the Parks and Recreation Commission twice, and they weighed in quite specifically on those tools. So those were aired publicly.
Okay. Anyone else?
I have a question about the prioritization tools, and I couldn't really identify in there where you could prioritize purchasing a new park or acquiring land. I didn't really see that in there. And I think maybe Commissioner Saxena's questioning there, because it said on page 156 that there was a community workshop, and I think this paragraph makes it look like 30 community members prioritized the list. It kind of reads that way, and I think that's probably where we're getting maybe misled.
Okay, well, if it reads that way, that is not intentional, that was not the goal of that workshop. That was the May workshop that was commissioned by hosted by the Parks and Recreation Commission, where we invited, in another manner, community feedback on some of those major potential projects, and we were ready to host as many people as showed up, and we got some instant voting feedback on those attendees, and there were about 30 attendees or so. So we provided that. We've provided everybody's feedback as we've gone along and posted it. So that was another piece of feedback from that particular group.
Okay, so if we are looking at the prioritization tables, then is there a way that you can raise that request to purchase new parkland? And I saw that it was listed as MP3 for I guess a policy for equity.
Yes.
So how can that happen? And is there somewhere in here that people can make that request?
This is one mechanism, is to have commissioners and members of the community, and we've been hearing throughout this input process that there's concern about our areas that are parkland deficient, and that we really should be prepared to seize any opportunities. And that's, again, why the plan is deliberately opportunistic, that to date we haven't seen interest in condemning private property. That has never been suggested, so de facto acquisition would need to be from a willing seller or from a dedication from a developer. So if this commission feels that goal should be elevated and should be deliberately flagged in this document as an overarching goal, that would be useful to hear.
Anything, Commissioner Fung?
So I have a couple probably really specific ones. I'm curious, so one of the things that I noticed, I believe is a change from my old days on the Parks and Rec Commission, is the Creekside Park is now designated as a large neighborhood park versus being a community park. I think that it used to be a Pier to Memorial Park in the previous cycle. And I'm curious, is my read correct, and was there a reason for that?
The sorting mechanism we did that started in 2017, we as a foundation of this examination of our park system, the current consultant team came in, and their suggestion was to look at what is really your kind of citywide facilities that are substantial in scope and really serve a very wide range of activities and really draw community-wide. And we brought that was the very first major deliverable we brought to the commission and the community, was looking at what is a community-wide park, a large neighborhood park, a small neighborhood park. And that was, there was consensus on that. So the Memorial and the Stevens Creek Corridor Assembly of Parcels were deemed our two community-wide parks. I can see that Creekside does, with its sports fields, draw from across the community, as do Wilson and Hoover and some of our other sites.
I think that just for context, I mean, maybe this is more appropriate for the comment section, but there are, in particular, what jumped out at me was that there were comments in the, across the master plan that talk about potential for development of some of the major facilities, and that included Jollyman, for instance, as a consideration. So it's interesting just from a geographic distribution standpoint, and in terms of the usage. I would actually probably classify Creekside as being generally, if you were looking for a site for aquatic center or something, that might be more appropriate. But so just that comment. I'm curious to, so there are many items that were embedded inside the Stevens Creek Corridor Plan, which are not mentioned here. Is that just because this will unstick the Stevens Creek Corridor Plan? So in particular, I mean, I think the one that's most notable, and I did see actually did appear in some of the comments, was what about the Blackberry Farm Golf Course?
Yes, the the Stevens Creek Corridor Master Plan did get fairly far along. Went to the council in April, I want to say April 2016, with a draft preferred concept. And the council at that time talked quite a bit about the future of the golf course and looked at a couple of different alternatives. They did not make a decision, and in fact, they chose to proceed with this citywide planning process to look at where we need to invest community-wide, and then to let the Stevens Creek Corridor Master Plan follow on the heels of this before we start making choices about just the Stevens Creek Corridor, to look first at what our needs were across our whole system. So that was at their direction.
Yeah. And then there was one other question I had. There was a reporting of the size of facilities, and that included reporting on a number of the regional non-city sites, so Rancho San Antonio, for instance. And I'm curious, you know, the size of those facilities, of Rancho, Fremont Older, there were a couple, there must be two others. They reported the acreage that was within the city limits. I was just curious, since those don't come into a calculation of the, you know, the parkland space, since those aren't territory, why it was chosen to do that instead of reporting, you know, Rancho San Antonio was reported as like 200 and, I don't know, the actual size of Rancho San Antonio is about 4,200 acres, but it's showing in there as, you know, 200 or something like that.
That was informational to show what part of the acreage is in Cupertino city limits. And if you look at the notes column for Fremont Older and Rancho and Stevens Creek County Park, the notes column does indicate the total acreage. So those sites straddle our city limits lines, and some people were interested in how much of the acreage falls within our jurisdiction.
Interesting choice. You know, when you go to Rancho San Antonio, you know, you perceive it as a 4,000 acre park, not as a 200. So because those don't actually enter into a calculation, you know, that would also be a consideration for a change.
Oh, and would you suggest striking them from the table?
No, I would actually report them as the full size.
As the full size, since
reserve,
we're not counting the acreage anyway?
And then as a comment, I would say that X acres are within happen to lie within the city limits.
Okay, thank you for that input.
Thanks.
I've got like 2 or 3 items on my end that I just add. These are just comments from other residents that might help you with your input process. First one is, can you reduce allergens in the park? I think some of the Cupertino mascot tree that we plant all the time is the one that causes a lot of allergies when all that stuff flies out. The second one is related to how we handle electric bikes and motorized scooters in a way, hopefully not hampering electric wheelchairs, but something to think about. And then I think there was a last one, which is really about having Wi-Fi access and electrical grid throughout some of the parks. So might be a suggestion that I didn't think was in there.
Is the suggestion to have Wi-Fi access throughout all parks?
Could be, yeah. Think about your master plan. So.
Okay. And
that's it. And congratulations on a very comprehensive plan. So.
Okay, thank you.
Place.
I did a park comparison table with other cities adjacent to Cupertino to look at the parkland acreage per 1,000 residents. And what I noticed is that the surrounding cities, they don't, if it's not within the city limits, they don't count it for their parkland acreage. And I thought that was kind of interesting because, like, looking at Los Altos, you might think that there's a lot of green space. They only got a 1.3 acres per 1,000. That was really surprising. Los Gatos had 38.5 acres per 1,000. And we were, it really depended on what you thought the growth was going to be like for the city. So if you used 64,000 residents, I got 2.8. If you excluded the Cupertino School District sites, and then it was 3.4 if you included it. And it looked like most of our surrounding cities included the school sites in their ratios. But if you think that our population is going to grow to 80,000 and we haven't acquired any more parkland, then we're down to 2.2 if you exclude the school sites, and 2.7 if you include it. So looking forward in the future, are we going to be acquiring more parkland or providing recreational facilities for the parts of the city that don't have any? And on that, about having the aquatic center at Creekside, my brain just exploded thinking about that. Was anyone considering having an aquatic center there and a gym, and then relocating the soccer and cricket complex to Blackberry Farm? Were wild ideas thrown out on this plan? Something like that?
Yeah, we've been welcoming creative solutions, and there definitely is interest in having some additional amenities, but people are loath to part with any of our existing green space. And one of the recommendations in this plan, for example, is before we just expand parking at a site, look at solutions that don't affect the current paved footprint and that don't affect the green space that's available. We've been hearing from our residents the point that you're making.
So it would be to acquire some structure, some land, maybe in an underused area that isn't housing, that isn't parkland right now. That would be something that you'd be willing to look at. But so with Creekside, it's basically a no-go on changing it from the green space it is now to putting a facility there. Is that about right?
All of this is subject to the community's future desire and our current and future council's direction. And it's ideally, we could find additional acreage. That would be the ideal solution to implement new facilities with a new footprint. That's what everyone would love to see if we can make that happen, absolutely.
Okay. Any other comments?
Before you jump in, I had one other question. There was a reference to something called improved outdoor space for neighborhood events that appears on page P1. In the PDF on page 124.
Yes.
Curious what that was. What exactly that was?
That would be
Jeff,
primarily
why don't you take that
to increase the infrastructure so that the events could occur in a more efficient manner. So if you're at a particular park, maybe we'll have better electric service rather than bring in generators, stuff like that.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
All right. I think we are all good with comments here. Opening up to comments outside to the public. Remember, it's 3 minutes. Please come up, state your name, and let us know what you think. So, Jennifer Griffin.
Good evening, Planning Commission and staff. Congratulations to the staff for a very comprehensive plan. I did attend pretty much all of the events that you all had, and it looks like there was a lot of outreach to the public. I just have some comments on what we've been talking about and items in the plan, and I'll try to go fast. One is I'd like to have Stockelmeyer House as a history house, such as Los Altos has their history house. Parks should be on the ground, and the city should own them lock, stock, and barrel. Also, please don't put too much stuff in Memorial Park. It is a park. Okay. To me, being from the east end of Cupertino, to me, the #1 priority should be the purchase and acquisition of the Lawrence Mitty Parkland. It has been promised to the city, to the eastern neighborhoods for over 15 years. We have waited patiently. We have talked about it. It sits out there. I believe that it is on the future acquisition list. It needs to be, it's because of the urban villages, San Jose has an urban village down Lawrence Expressway to the other side of Moore Park, Bollinger. That means that Cupertino will control to the middle of Lawrence Expressway if we get that parkland. We need to identify park deficit areas of the city. We need to identify areas where parcels of land could be purchased to make a park. I would encourage individuals or corporations to donate land or money to make parks or purchase land for future parks. Individuals can use estate planning in their wills to acquire parkland. This is done in many cities and many across the country. I would encourage individuals or corporations to buy or donate land that adjoins existing parkland, to extend parkland, or to join two existing parkland areas together. I think, to me, especially with the comment that the population of Cupertino may be rising in the future, we have to look to the future, the acquisition of parkland is something that has to keep going on an ongoing basis. I mean, it's not just for 10 years, 20 years, it's 100, 200 years. So I would encourage the acquisition of parkland, especially Lawrence Midi, which is highly, highly critical to the area and to the eastern neighborhoods and to Cupertino itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next speaker, Stephen Lester.
Hello. Thank you again for the great plan. I'm Stephen Lester. I'm with the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. And I just wanted to mention this is a great plan for the long term, but we have some ideas about how things could get started today, including planting native oaks. We could start by planting 1 or 3 per park. I think you mentioned the pollinator gardens. It's a high priority to plant them next to creeks and plant native species close to the creek beds, and we can help come up with a list of native plants and stuff if necessary. I'd also like to state that I'm against getting rid of any existing green spaces, and like it's been mentioned, to expand our parkland acquisition. As you mentioned, the number 1 priority that you've heard is conservation and preserving natural spaces. So I would like an emphasis on keeping parks as natural as possible, minimizing parking imprint, maybe expanding public transportation to parks, or otherwise getting people to parks that maybe don't have cars or so we don't have to expand parking to them. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have a scheduling conflict and timing. I will be switching over the chairmanship to Vice Chair Vikram Saxena, and he'll be taking over from this point.
Thank you, Chairman Wang, and hope you have a nice, comfortable flight.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Dashiell Leeds.
Hello, my name is Dashiell Leeds. I'm a volunteer environmental advocate for Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. Our chapter headquarters are located at McClellan Ranch, and our organization has been a part of the Cupertino community for decades. We really appreciate the focus on ecology and sustainability in the Parks and Rec Master Plan. Thank you to staff, especially Jeff Melkus, Gail Seeds, and to the others who have contributed to this plan, including members of the public and of this commission who have offered their comments and suggestions. We have a recommendation for short-term vegetative enhancements added in to support our local pollinators So for all parks that include riparian corridors, please add a short-term goal to plant native pollinator plants along creek corridors. This will facilitate pollinator movement and will benefit our entire ecosystem. This goal is straightforward and can be easily accomplished in a short time frame, and we recommend that the plan be as specific as possible in specifying the species to be planted and the locations to plant them in. These short-term goals can be included in the site-specific recommendations in Chapter 4, as well as in the site-specific recommendations in Table E1. Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society will be available to help with this process, and thank you for all of your hard work, and we look forward to it continuing.
Thank you, Nashel. The next speaker is Peggy Griffin.
Good evening, commissioners, staff. My name is Peggy Griffin. A few things. Under the enhancement and equitable access goals, I think in order to figure out where you're going or headed, you need to know where you're at. And so at the City Council, they suggested a density map and also an assessment of each park. I've looked at the tables, and they really don't tell me the current state. For example, I read all 62 pages of the student input, and 2 comments that stood out to me was restrooms needed to be maintained and kept up. And some of them don't have restrooms. So that would be a basic thing that you would just look at all the parks, and if you had a status of each park, you could say, oh, the restrooms need to be fixed. The other thing is with the density, then you can tell where the people are. And 20 years from now, when you reassess your park needs, you'll have something to compare to. The other thing is I'm hoping that when you update, I'm assuming you're going to make some changes before it goes to final approval. And if so, I request that you put a revision date and mark the changes, because I'm a slow reader and I don't want to have to read the entire document again. I want to just go down and see what changed. Let's see. The other thing is access, buying parkland. I think very high on your list, 2 things you should have as a policy or whatever it is, the right of first refusal. It should be in your document, and it should probably be in the general plan. Identify parcels that they're not for sale now, but maybe one day they will, and you notify the owner that you want right. I don't know how you do it legally. There's a lot of land all over the city that are blue on the zoning map. They're quasi-public. They're churches. They're PG&E utilities. There's all those that are already zoned kind of quasi-public could become parks if they become free. That should be really high on your list. And the other thing is the agreement. You need to add an addendum to the CUSD joint agreement to add Lawson and Sedgwick, and you need to pursue the ones with the high schools. It's possible. Go in with a yes rather than a no. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. The next speaker is Lisa Ward.
Hi. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. So, as part of the attachments to the staff report, there's a mention of where City Council was with suggesting or giving guidance. I can't remember what the term is. Study session direction regarding desired revisions to what you presented to them on February 5th. And so I reviewed that. I was at that meeting, and there was something said at that meeting that concerned me, and unfortunately it's going to take up my whole 3 minutes to talk about this one thing, but I think it's important enough to do that. And that is the second to last bullet item on their revisions, which is a recommendation to explore acquiring or gaining use of the parcel adjacent to Sedgwick Elementary School, Scharf and Sinks. I have been trying to get information about this Sedgwick property, adjacent property, from CUSD, not actively recently, but when it first showed up on their agenda, it was a rainy December night, and I went to the meeting specifically to talk about it. It was on their agenda, and yet they didn't talk about it. So I started questioning what's going on. Well, there weren't a lot of answers. Jeremy, who was the public information officer at the time, had left the district. I don't know if Chris Jew is still there, actually. But every time I asked a question, it was sort of a non-answer. It was listed on the agenda as Sedgwick expansion. They did go ahead and purchase that lot with the house on it. It's since the house has been demoed and they've done cleanup of pesticides, so they've spent some more money on that. They spent close to $5 million on that piece of property, which is, if I remember correctly, less than 1.5 acres, maybe 1.25 acres. If somebody knows, you can tell me. If the city was to acquire that property from the school district, that takes away the ability to expand the school in an area where the school already has a bunch of portables. They've lost playground space. And it's an area that is likely, let's put it more bluntly, will have a tremendous growth in population via a tremendous growth in housing. Therefore, the reason the city, or excuse me, the school district purchased that property, they were sort of like, okay, this is a once in a lifetime. The family had owned it forever. They were finally willing to sell. Do I fault the district for buying it for over what it was worth? No, I don't. I wish there was some transparency about it, because there was not, and there still isn't, as far as I know. You know, you got to buy it when it's there, because knowing housing is coming along. This was at the same time where the district was pushing the Valco thing with Peter Powell and wheeling and dealing. So assuming that they thought there was going to be housing, it makes sense to prepare for more students. But if the school district has any plan to sell that property and let the city acquire it for a park, there's big problems in my mind and the mind of many about that. The city would have to obviously pay more than they paid for it, plus the cleanup. That makes it even less of a deal for the property. We've got Creekside Park, basically 1.5 blocks away. Granted, Creekside is across a busy street.
Lisa.
Oh,
we
you didn't have my button.
We
goody,
started
I
the
get more
timer a
time.
bit late, so could you please wind down?
Not my fault.
It was my fault.
So I would urge you, because I know there's been grumblings amongst the city for at least over a year about that possibility. Big mistake to acquire that property. I go back to, you need to be using the school joint use agreements if you want any piece of that. Otherwise, you have basically screwed the east side even more. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. The next speaker is Rahul Vasant.
I'm speaking only for myself, honorable commissioners. I'd like you, if you can take into consideration the possibility of a joint venture between the city and Flint Center. Looking at the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, such a significant amount of funds has been allocated here. I think that a much smaller fraction of that could go into seismic retrofitting at Flint. Flint Center is already a phenomenal theater with an incredible track record here in our city with the Celebrity Series, which I'm told has gone on for almost 5 decades, possibly longer than that, and many community events. The Flint Center is in a phenomenal location, and I think that our city already has a performing arts center, and I'd love if all of you could weigh in on this. before it goes back to council. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Vasant. That ends all the blue cards I have. So we'll probably move on and close the public comment section now. Commissioners, do you have anything to add before we continue on?
I'm not entirely sure if I'm allowed to ask another clarifying question, but it was brought up about the joint use with the schools, and I believe 9 schools were mentioned, and then a couple of schools were brought up in the comments. So could you elaborate on that? Like, how many schools could there be with a joint use, and then how many actually are?
Yes, there are 11 elementary and middle schools in Cupertino Union School District within our city limits, and we have a joint use agreement that covers 9 of them. Lawson Middle and Sedgwick Elementary are not addressed by our joint use agreement. And it was renewed recently, roughly 2 years ago. And my understanding is that the district was not amenable to adding those 2 sites at that time. But I was not privy to the negotiations or discussion, and if there's interest in re-examining that, that could be done. I'm sure staff would be happy to approach them, and given the strength of council's direction, to pursue partnerships. But I hope that answers your question.
Pretty much, but I'm wondering, are these sites being then permitted out to soccer? Is it just the fields and soccer and baseball? Like, who's using that space, and is it fully permitted, Monday through Saturday with just Sunday off?
Okay.
Yeah, if I could add. Yeah, primarily they're all used for sports. The way that we permit these facilities will issue to one particular sports group somewhat of a blanket permit, who will go out and then be able to use that under the agreement that during time that they don't have active use of the property, that they'll be open and work with other sports groups. So in a sense, it's kind of a self-policing manner. However, it's not the most efficient and effective way to dole out or permit your athletic facilities. We know this. As a result, council is considering on their work plan a work plan item that would ask staff or direct staff to analyze and investigate and figure out what that best way to permit out the athletic facilities. In the best of all worlds, that would actually add our capacity if it was done it maybe in a different manner. And there's many ways to do this. You could, I don't want to suggest that there's any one way or not until we get into talking to neighbors and the public, but as a proposal, what if we permitted out fields on more of an hourly basis for certain facilities, so that the sports groups would have access only when they truly need them? Now, the sports groups will argue, that they need the flexibility, which they really do. So this is not going to be an easy process, but it is an important one, and it's an important one that we tackle and do in a very transparent manner and pull everybody to the table we possibly can. So I guess what I would say is stay tuned, because I think council is going to ask us to tackle that on their work plan next year.
I think one of the reasons that they want the flexibility is, at least I can speak somewhat for the soccer communities, they're looking for turfed fields, and it's regional, so they're looking for the turf fields which are available regionally, and then they want the grass fields which are in the best condition, and Creekside tends to be it for the best condition natural fields. Yeah.
Commissioner Funk, do you have?
So I've got a number of comments. First of all, I want to thank you for the incredible amount of work. You know, I was kind of there back in the very beginning of the discussion of having a master plan for park activities. You know, just as a historical thing, I think that a historical item that doesn't really, it's not really captured in the plan so much, is that that there's been a lot of public confusion in the past about what we were doing with the parks, and part of that was, I think, that this predates you, Jeff, but you know, Recreation and Community Service did excellent due diligence on maintaining the list of the things that people were asking for, but because there was no master plan, what was happening was that every time something came up for review, you know, for consideration of updates, then the entire list seemed to get applied to it. I mean, you know, if you're talking about Somerset Park, nobody would suggest putting a cricket field there, although I guess it came pretty close with this last analysis, you know, the one that was hanging out to the freeway. So I think that, you know, the confusion that came from that, I think it kind of came to a head with the Stevens Creek corridor, you know, the next phase of the Stevens Creek corridor master plan, where, you know, for the purpose of doing an EIR, all the high impact things were combined together and presented in a way. This is a problem here where the public's understanding of, you know, what does an EIR look at, what does a specific plan or a master plan look at, is not very clear. And everybody started to wonder, hey, you're talking about building a lighted soccer field and, you know, making a bigger swimming pool and all, you know, all these sort of things. When that was not, you know, when the intent was to understand the impact, you know, the maximum impact, and to set that envelope. So I think that this is a very, very powerful tool for trying to allow the public to understand what's in mind. You know, the best example, I think, well, one of the early popular items was the aquatic center. It's dropped down a little in the latest plan, and that's, I mean, that's good. Well, not relative. I mean, it's good that it's, you know, that's had greater clarity. But I think that one of the big challenges with something like the aquatic center is that the single line of aquatic center has very little meaning to people, and that there's actually a value decision that the public would, you know, like to take into account, which says, you know, what would I be getting if I got, you know, the two words aquatic center, and what would the cost be, right? And so I think that this is actually a very, very powerful tool for helping people get their minds around that and understand that. And I think that I think there were some questions. I may be paraphrasing you wrong, but I believe that part of what Commissioner Saxena was asking about was what was the public involvement looking like in the prioritization of things that would be done, and the concern would be, you know, if 20 people showed up, 30 people showed up, and then they made a decision that said, you know, hey, we want to have a, you know, aquatic center, or build a particular park, that's not a great way to do it. But I think the problem is at this early phase when nobody knows what does the aquatic center mean, what would Lawrence Mitty Park look like, or some other proposed kind of park expansion, then it's very difficult to have that public discussion. And having this master plan that kind of starts to put some bones around what is it that we're trying to do, really, that is the thing that enables that public discussion. When you start to say, hey, you know, we're going to have an enclosed swim facility, we're going to have a gymnasium. Gymnasium actually got very, very popular. That was not a popular one in the early days. Once people understand exactly what it is that they're talking about, then I think that it's much more constructive about where you would put it. You know, what is the priority relative to other things the city might do, and then perhaps the most important part for these expensive projects, you know, the council can start to prioritize how they're going to make, you know, set aside the money to actually build these things, to fund these. So I think that's really, really important, and this is, you know, probably the most important possible tool you could have to have a good, effective public discussion. I think there are a couple things. Let's see. One of the things that probably could be clearer to my mind, and I think would be useful, is again, early on there was a discussion about having a kind of standard set of park features, and the sense of the appropriateness of being able to measure and judge the appropriateness of whether those might go into a, you know, park renovation, for instance. So an example, and I think one that showed high interest in it was personal high interest for me, and was high interest with the council, was to do things like to distribute community garden space, you know, among the different parks. And so one of the places where I think that there could be greater clarity in the, and I realize where you are in the process here, so I'm not expecting, you know, massive change, but I think there could be greater clarity on what are the characteristics that would allow you to have, you know, to be considering something like having a neighborhood community garden in the park, you know, and to have a better sense of what it is the elements are that you would expect to see. Let's see. There was actually some talk and some great comments from the public here about how do you procure the land in a place when there's no land to be had anymore. And so, and this is one of the ones that I think you actually touched on it. Let me see. You touched on it under the term life estate. I would actually go even a little farther. You know, if you know, past Commissioner Paulson actually talked about this a lot. I would encourage you to throw a stake down in the ground, identify the places that you want to have in the future. One of the ways to do that is to talk to the people who live there today and say, you know, I'd like to purchase the opportunity to have this discussion in the future without displacing you today. And this means, you know, I think the place where Jeff was a huge proponent of this was along the Stevens Creek Trail, where it would be great to have a trail that ran by Stevens Creek someday, but the problem is that the property lines run to the center of the creek. Mm-hmm. So these are actually great examples of, you know, mark all the homes that are adjacent to the creek, and it won't happen for 50 years, but over time, as those properties change, you may find that you have the opportunity to find the 20 feet that you need to create that trail, and that actually would go as well. I would say even beyond the obvious ones like expanding the riparian space, you really do want to look at things like, you know, Sterling Barnhart Park. It's a great little park, mm-hmm. But you know, that's again an example of on a citywide basis. I would encourage you in the plan to look at where are the opportunities where if I could expand this in the future, where are the opportunities? Because you never know when that opportunity is going to come up. I think laying those out and making it simple for, you know, this council and the councils in the future to see, hey, you know, do we want to maintain a pool of money that we can be used to purchase future rights? You know, I think that actually has very high value. I would actually make one of the things, and we talked about this before the meeting, one of the things that makes the bike plan very, very powerful is that they made a very clear identification of their kind of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, where I think for anybody who looks at that, they would go, holy cow, look at this phase 3, you know, it's $100 million worth of bike trail modifications. Why would we ever do that? How would we ever do that? But I think the idea is that there is, whether it's what will be your final thing, you know, of course it won't be, things will change a long time, but I think it's very important to have a very clear picture to people. These are the things we intend to do soon. These are the things that we intend to do in a longer time, and it's very useful for you to have your best guess of what that's going to cost right next to it so that people can understand that. You actually do that. I mean, you know, you have the chapter where, you know, you start saying, hey, you know, the priorities are Memorial Park, you know, and so on. Does that. It's not quite as clear as it probably ought to be, just so that somebody picking up looks at this and goes, okay, well, you know, I don't know whether Memorial Park's probably a $20 million project or something. But those are the interesting questions I think people would probably want to see. And I think you benefit, even if it's not, you know, even if the 2019 answer to that, you know, to what that list looks like, is not the forever answer. I would also, I think that, and this comes back to my comment earlier about Creekside Park, that there's clearly, you know, with any of these parks, there's clearly going to be a big community outreach. Mm-hmm. Again, the master plan is an opportunity for you to make a statement to the community, to the neighbors, about how you know, how this park, you know, fits into the big picture. And I would actually consider looking at, when you look at the parks, to perhaps create a rating which is programmed and unprogrammed. So I live near Hoover Park. Hoover Park is clearly a programmed park, a lot of soccer activity. The school fields are the same. Creekside Park, obviously, as well, clearly programmed. Three Oaks Park, pretty much an unprogrammed park. And the characteristic is very different, and I think Linda Vista is probably that way as well. And that's one of the places where I think you would see some difference. You know, obviously there's a high level of programming at Jollyman as well, but not probably not as high. It doesn't seem to me as high as at Creekside. I could be wrong on that. So, you know, characteristics wise, I think that's probably an interesting differentiator on the kinds of things you would do in the future. One of the things I think was really great there was emphasis on nature play. I've been a huge fan of that from the beginning. I remember one of the early discussions we had as Parks and Rec commissioners were that everybody's favorite place to play when they were a kid was the haunted forest somewhere near their home. And so it's my hope, of course, that someday that haunted forest and a little bit of that will live in each of the parks. I would actually emphasize that more, even though I think you actually have a lot of really good stuff in there about that. But I think that those sorts of models, the model, there is a flavor of, I know how Hoover Park looks today, and I think if the outcome of the master plan was that the flavor of how it looks tomorrow is, it probably won't look quite so much like grass, you know, a big rectangle of grass, and it'll probably look a lot more, you know, natural elements, community elements, you know, the set of tables today where people kind of hang out will start to become the mini amphitheater of tomorrow. You know, I think that saying those things will really help grab people's imagination and help them get around their minds around it. And that's really the key to engagement is, you know, for somebody to understand, you know, if there's a model of I'd like your neighborhood park to be a little bit more like, you know, something that you go, you know, where you want, if you're going to meet with somebody, rather than saying, you know, let's go to Starbucks by the post office, you want the answer to be, hey, come to my park, because there's a good place to sit, you know, and Wi-Fi is an interesting one. It is either really good or really bad. I suspect you're going to cause an enormous argument there. But those sorts of things are the things that will really captures people's mind. And then I would also, given the timeline that you're talking about, I would also consider if you can put some bones around future expansions for, you know, future renovation for Quinlan and for the senior center. I had the pleasure this last weekend of going to the dedication of the new Mountain View Community Center. It's pretty amazing. But this is in that category. That's about a $30 million project, I think. And this is one of those things where it's very difficult for it to happen if there isn't a stake in the ground that says, these are the things we'd like to do, even if it is definitely I mean, you know, it's interesting. I know the facilities director in Mountain View fairly well, and he had commented, you know, he actually has history from when Quinlan was first new. So he says, actually, they were just catching up, although they did a pretty amazing job catching up. So I think that those are things where, you know, among these big blobs, there were some controversial ones here. I think that the Arts Center, Performing Arts Center, was very controversial, in the comments at least. I certainly can understand that. But I think get those other things in there too, and make sure that people have a way. I think there's always been a challenge of saying, you know, I'd like to see something. I'd like to have a place to play basketball. People from Wilson Park had come early on in the master planning process, had come and said, you know, hey, what do we need to do to get a basketball court here, full set of, you know, full court basketball court here, and the answer is sort of, at that time, it's quite challenging because many things could happen, many things could have been considered if you open the box up. And being able to do things like say, hey, you know, these are the places where we think basketball courts are going. Of course, it's still open in negotiation, but laying those out in the master plan, those things are really, you know, the guy at Wilson Park, who was a big proponent of, you know, I mean, he was literally, who do I write the check to help make this happen, right? He may actually be very happy, you know, if he has the ability to interact on a facility that might not be at Wilson Park, I think that that will lead to the best solutions for the community. So again, thank you. Thank you. I think there's a lot of great stuff there. If it wasn't such a short thing, and this is my fault for maybe not providing the input sooner, I would definitely try to make it very obviously clear to anybody who picks this up. This is how, we're going to need a whole lot of money to do all these things over this very, very long period of time. And this is the order that we envision today in doing that in. And I think that doing that makes it easy in the short term as the opportunities come up to check things off now. And it makes it much easier to have the discussion about what those things are, about what those big things are going to be in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Funk. I'd like to add a few more things. I think, as you mentioned, community engagement is very important, and I'll thank you for making all the effort to do it. I think one thing I would also encourage you to do is think of more options like an open video conference where people can dial in even if they can't come in to a meeting, because people might have kids, they want to participate, and they cannot take out that block of time to come. So have more ways where people can participate in the process. The second aspect, I think, which I'm hearing again and again from the community is about the imbalance between parks in the east side versus the west side. And I think given the allocations we have at the Irvine property for 1,000 homes and what happens at Valco, I think it's important that people also get a quantitative sense of what the imbalance is. So I think there was a comment about density maps and how they correlate to green space. I think that's one of the things which can help everybody in the city empathize with the issue, so that there can be a consensus and a broad understanding of one aspect which should probably be prioritized in some ways. So I would also recommend it for some of those issues, you add more data which helps the community visualize and understand the problem and the challenges which different community members are echoing. Now, this is not something directed at you personally, but I want to understand what the Flint Center issue which wasn't brought up. And if other commissioners have some thought to add, or if the city staff had some thought to add, I'll love to know about that. Thank you.
I attended the Fremont De Anza Board of Trustees meeting, and it sounded as though it was between $10 and $15 million to retrofit it. And just working that out as a comparison between us starting from scratch, building our own, it's an interesting idea to try to partner with them because of the cost being so much less. And then just recently I went to, in Campbell, at their community center, and they could hold 800 people there. And I was there for a naturalization ceremony, and they had to do it in 2 groups, and then they were telling us that we were waiting outside, you might be turned away. And, we finally did get in just to watch, but if that had moved over at Flint Center, they could have fit everyone in, all at one time. And I did have some more comments that I wanted to add in, so I don't know when you want me to do that.
I was actually just going to comment with regard to Flint. I mean, I think the challenge, or traditional challenge for Flint Center has been that it's very large, and that makes it challenging to program on a kind of financially viable basis. I think the intention for what was being discussed, I don't know how close what was being discussed in the master plan and what was being discussed at Valco, the Valco specific plan match, but those were much smaller facility, I think 700 seaters, comparable to the Mountain View one, which is probably 600. So it is a challenge. It's very frustrating to see, see the situation with Flint Center. But it just may be difficult because the kinds of events, you have to book large events to make it work.
Yeah, I think I was about to touch upon that because I know you had mentioned, or during the past meetings, I'd heard about the fact that the Flint Center is a bit too large for many of the events. When we're doing the retrofit, is it possible to redesign it into a facility which can also operate at a smaller level, where you don't have to turn on the ventilation and AC and the costs for heating up or cooling the entire venue, and you could have a smaller venue and something which expands into a larger venue when needed? It might cost more, but it might solve a lot of the problems we're talking about. And yes, I have very happy memories of the Campbell Center, because that's where I got naturalized.
Yeah. So I think one of the other issues, I mean, I don't know whether you want to speak to that. I mean, I think that it has been difficult in the past. You know, it's that facility is Foothill De Anza property, and there hasn't been the interaction with the community college has been, you know, somewhat distant. They actually have the unfortunate distinction of being even more poorly funded than CUSD. So they're watching their dollars very carefully there.
Thank you.
So I wanted to make sure that the general plan target is mentioned in our master plan, and they were hoping to get to something like 5 acres per 1,000 residents, and then we have to couple that with having these new developments coming, which are going to be lowering our ratios, and I already mentioned those. In the general plan, they did actually count the Rancho Rinconada swim facility, and I don't know if that's something that the city's looking at wanting to acquire. And in addressing altering some of the uses of fields which are used by sports, I want to mention, like the De Anza Youth Soccer League has for 2016 2,360 participants. So it might be a challenge to change some of those fields in the future, to put it mildly. Someone mentioned something sounds really simple, but restrooms at all the fields. I don't know if they all have them, and I know, you know, when my kids were playing soccer, we'd go to a school site and the school would be closed. There'd be no restroom, and so that's not great. I would like to see the equity moved up to the top of the list, to the point where I'd almost say moratorium on spending until we've got this figured out, because we don't really have a set plan. And then in the way it's going to end up looking as these projects in the other side of town come through is that, well, we're not going to change Creekside. We don't have a plan for what to get the east side. But we do have these parks, so we can fix them up. So I'm concerned about how that's going to look, and I would like to see equity moved up higher. I love the sort of, to me, it's kind of a less expensive, but has huge benefits, changes, which would be to have the trees, the bigger canopies, and the pollinator pathways. And I'm even curious, you know, if there's something we can do in the parkway strips in areas which are already irrigated. Maybe they're commercial. Is there some way that there can be some negotiation with the property owners, the commercial property owners, for changing that from, in a lot of the middle part, I guess it would be heart of the city, it's just grass, you know, just plain simple turf. If that could be changed to, you know, California native plants, is there any way that could happen? I loved the high schoolers and the junior high or middle school feedback. There was someone identified that there was a regressive tax, and I was really impressed with that. And that they even questioned whether or not they wanted a teen center, if they thought they would even use it. That was pretty, because it would go for them. And I was impressed with that. And they also did notice the park equity issues. The new comments that came in February, it seemed to reflect And I kind of wonder how this happened, but it seemed to reflect a correlation between your satisfaction with the parks and the plan with where you lived in the city. And I'm wondering if some of the lack of feedback that you were getting last year and maybe, you know, in the years past had to do with people who lived on the east side being so involved with what was going on at Valco that they weren't participating in these things because there was, like, you know, double plans going through and they were really busy. I'm concerned about what levels of spending people are willing to bear. And if there's, you know, as you go through, you know, you can get this much for this dollar amount and you can get this for this dollar amount. And then if we haven't offered things for people who live in the park deficient areas and we end up going to a bond, how much support will you get from the whole city? Because, you know, you want everybody, if you've got a good plan, you want to have everybody vote for it. So you need to make sure that everybody's, you know, got buy-in for it. I was concerned about programming, and I would like to see some analyzation and analysis of the Fremont High School Adult School Program, the Parks and Rec program, and the library programs. And I'm concerned about a conflict with facilities because we're looking at possibly adding a library program room, and is that money going to be pulled out of money that maybe went to Lawrence Mitty? And then we've got Parks and Rec also having programming, and so it seems like there needs to be some negotiation around that. And let's see if there's anything else. And we talked about the Flint Center, and I thought that open video conference was a great idea. Okay, thank you.
Actually, I would also want to touch about the Rancho swimming pool aspect and whether the city can acquire that. I just got to know about it a few days ago. I was reading some article or something, and I think that's a very interesting idea because I don't know how it functions right now and what the covenants or anything are, but if we already have something and we don't have to take away the green space to build something else, I would strongly recommend we consider it as part of the plan.
Excuse me, just to clarify. If I turn on the mic, it'll help. I would just like to clarify, you're proposing considering acquisition of Rancho Rinconada if it is available?
Well, yes. I mean, what I'm suggesting is that we explore that option of using the existing aquatic center rather than building something more and take away like green space from Creekside or wherever else you would have built that. So again, I don't know all the details about how that works and who is eligible to go there and what the ownership is, but that's one suggestion because we already have an existing facility within the city, which could be repurposed so that everybody has access to it.
Okay, now I think I understand your suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, historically, the acquisition of additional pool facilities has been something that the Rec and Community Service has done very actively, both looking at trying to cut deals with FUHSD, which probably, you know, obviously are more distributed, as well as having a little bit better pool facilities. But, you know, that is it's a privately financed district where it's operated by an assessment on the Rancho Rinconada parcels. So it's a challenge.
Okay, so it is open to anybody in that district.
Yeah,
essentially.
They pay for it.
Okay, so we could work out a way where the city sort of acquires it or compensates them, and then it gets open to the entire city?
If I could add, it's actually open to everybody. It's just there's a higher fee that you pay in order to utilize it. It's a fairly small pool, but there are opportunities there, absolutely.
Yes, so I would, because I think there is a strong pressure from the eastern side to not let loose of any green space right now. So we should accommodate and see if there are other ways to fix that problem.
Okay.
Right, and you know, I don't know. You know, of course, the largest challenge, and I think it's well addressed in the plan, is, you know, where will additional park space come from? You know, when it is at those extraordinary high prices. You know, this is something I attended a planning commission Sunnyvale Planning Commission session about their downtown, their new downtown specific plan. And they actually, that's one of the things that there were a number of projects. They reviewed three projects, which included the city line, the enormous city line project. But one of the slides in there actually was talking about, the way that they will create, open space on the ground is that they're asking for height in the construction. And that is the strategy. I believe it's going to be the strategy for that plan. And it's very similar as well. I attended a presentation about Shorebird, which is one of the Google projects. It's kind of a Google urban village in North Bayshore. And that is, it has an enormous amount there. You go on this walking tour, it's an hour-long walking tour, and the first 25 minutes of it, you're walking through areas you're walking between buildings, which are not going to be there in the future. They're all going to be, that's going to become open space, but part of that trade to make that happen. In fact, they're actually having their meeting right now trying to work on that in Mountain View. One of the ways that that's happening is that does cause, they will have tall buildings in the built parts. So that's something that, as a strategy, it's probably out of the scope of what you would put in here, but I think that is something for the consideration of the council, that they need to think about, whether that's something that, whether they want to integrate a strategy like that into the plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Fung. Commissioner Moore, do you have anything else to add?
Actually, so I did have one other. I don't know how recently you've talked with FUHSD about the possibility of a shared performing arts center with them. They have talked about that in their development plan. I'm the president of the Bond Oversight Committee. So one of the things that they've discussed there was the possibility of a facility. They have an interest in building a district performing arts facility, probably at Cupertino High, and that they would be interested in having a discussion with the city about that. I would encourage you to reach out to the folks at FUHSD and understand what it is that they're intending to do. It's very different. It is not like what was being proposed at Valco. But in terms of the kinds of activities that people were talking, the Valco Performing Arts Center, you're talking about something that would be it's a you're having commercial acts come where there is a benefit of having, being at mid-restaurants and other nightlife. And this is a different kind of thing, but it's something that I would encourage you to reach out and talk to them about that, because that may be an alternative that's worth looking at. Very much, I'm familiar. There was actually some mention about the CUSD purchase at, I'm having trouble remembering the name of the school now. What? Sedgwick? Yeah, at Sedgwick. Very much like the Foothill De Anza problem. There's no dollars to build anything, but that has in the past been talked about, something where is there an opportunity to I know that there's been talk in the past about would a gym there, a shared gym facility, for instance, be something that would make sense, and it would be great to again, as part of this effort to capture where the thinking of those organizations are, and maybe they're not worthy of a further discussion, but they may be.
I want to add a couple comments about if there is additional facilities added on, that would be Finch, that you've already got Main Street and Apple Park and potentially Valco traffic in that area. So I'm pretty concerned about adding like a citywide facility. There's already inadequate parking at Sedgwick. And I don't know that even Cupertino High School has enough parking to expand if they were going to be providing something that would be for the wider community, that they have the ability to handle the traffic at that location either. And then I also want to reiterate that we really need to nail down that we're having parkland on the ground and that we're not going to be accepting rooftop park as in an exchange for that. That's, I believe that also got into the work plan, and we'll be discussing that under that instead.
Yeah, and actually I would like to add that there is a website, I'm forgetting the name, called Green Roofs, which has a list of all green roofs in the world. And I tried my best to look for a green roof which was publicly accessible and higher than, say, 2 stories or 3 stories above the ground level. I think some of the plans which we have discussed in the city in the past had green roofs at much, much higher elevation, which are meant to be open and accessible to everybody, which I'm not sure is the right way to go, simply because somebody might just throw a baseball down a plaza down there, and something falling from 150 feet can pretty much be devastating if it hits somebody out there. So I will echo what Commissioner Moore said, and if we are going to plan for a green roof or something as equivalent to ground thing, it has to be almost like something, a berm or something which would naturally fit in with the landscape, not something sitting on top of like a 7-story or a 10-story building. A ground level garage where the roof acts as parkland, that's probably what I would consider as something equivalent. Maybe it rises up 2 stories and so on. But something which is 7 or 10 stories high, and we think of that by being a green roof open to the public in general, I don't think we should be thinking in those terms at all. I've not seen that happen anywhere, and do have concerns about the safety, maintainability, and accessibility of something like that.
Yeah, if I could just comment on that, on the green roof thing. You know, one of the things that is part of the, Quimby Act's direction on, on parkland dedication, one thing it dedicates is park, and the other is recreational facilities. So I think drawing a clear distinction, we do that. This is not so much your Steerhouse, but in the specific plan, the ratio of privately accessible open space, it's credited only 50% relative to publicly. And so, having, perhaps coming up with a recommendation that does the same thing, that says, recreational facility might count at a different ratio. Even if, of course, public versus private might affect that ratio, grounded on, as it becomes taller, that may have an effect of reducing the effect. Obviously, that will favor something that's more traditional.
I'm not sure why we're bringing up the specific plan for Valco in this discussion.
Just as an example of how that, how the parkland dedication is applied. The model of, a lot of the elements of planning, are creating incentives and disincentives for doing certain things, and this is an example of a disincentive for private, for implementing private, privately accessible only open space. So.
Okay, then I would bring up that the specific plan, there were signatures gathered, and it was, as far as I know, subject to referendum.
I think if we are done with comments, we can probably move on to whatever motion we are supposed to take on this item.
My microphone again. We actually don't need a formal motion from this commission. We were really here to invite your feedback, your guidance, your direction, your critique, and so that we can incorporate your guidance appropriately. and share it with the council, who will be the ultimate decision makers on adopting a refined version of this plan. But we really appreciate your thoughts and your input. It's very, very helpful.
Yeah, the guidance and the direction we've heard from you tonight, as well as from our community members, is very much appreciated.
Yeah.
We've took copious notes, and the master plan input, as well as into our strategic planning, everything that was said will remain important to us. So thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we can move on to the next item, which is the staff and commission reports.
There are no staff reports tonight.
Commissioners, do you want to talk about any meetings or other reports which you would like to share?
The only meeting that I would comment on is I attended the State of the County address today. It was interesting. It ended up not being, although a lot of the activity of the Board of Supervisors has been related to, again, a lot of the planning issues that we see here. That was not what they talked about today. They talked mostly about healthcare.
About healthcare?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's a huge initiative. Amazing things they're doing.
Thank you.
So I did attend the previous city council meeting. I'm a little disappointed that the planning commissioners did not get to the Economic Development Committee meeting, commission meeting that were assigned to it. I did get to a citizen naturalization ceremony, like I mentioned, and that was pretty exciting, and people cheered for all the various countries. There were like 55 different countries represented. And this morning I was watching a Mike on Traffic webinar on transportation, and they were talking about the difference that's coming for us in transportation with regards to the autonomous vehicles. And he mentioned, because they're setting them up so that they're able to sense pedestrians and stop, there's some concern actually around universities and schools that if you have a person who's able now to cross the street whenever because they know a car is going to automatically stop, what impact that's going to have. But I thought that was very interesting, and they're talking about the future being quite a bit different because of the impact from these vehicles, and I think it's very interesting to see what's going to happen.
Actually, I think I've seen similar behavior in our schools at times. So something we'll think about. With that, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for attending.
I'm a retired school psychologist, and helping people was my thing.
I was very independent and thought I could take care of myself. I fell, and I had to have Meals on Wheels.
After my stroke, when Meals on Wheels started, I was on the other end of the stick, so to speak.
Meals on Wheels, coming to my door as someone who's housebound, having someone check on me.